everyone. Welcome to Live in La Vita Local Podcast, a retro gaming podcast for some of your retro gaming needs. My name is Fazz.
And I'm Rich, and my window is open. So you might get some weird noises from the street.
Oh,
it's
right.
bloody hot in here.
It sounds like you worked at a bank or something. Although, I think since COVID, you don't have windows.
Number 4, please.
Yeah. Oh, I missed that.
Do you?
Yeah, I think I do.
Really?
What's
wrong with you?
I miss the human interaction. Can I please have my current account with £9.95 in it? Can I withdraw, please? No. Yeah, definitely a pre-COVID sort of thing that doesn't exist anymore. In fact, all the banks are closing that horse, so there's like one bank left, and they've got all the money, all my money. So you been all right? Yeah.
I don't think that's how banks work.
Yeah. Wait, what? They've got my £9.95 safely sat there in the vault. Well, speaking of vaults next week, so how you doing? You all right?
Yeah, I'm all right. How are you?
Yeah, good. Yeah. Been busy the last couple of weeks.
Yeah.
So I saw Deadpool Wolverine the other day. So which is relevant to tonight's podcast because we are going to be looking at alliances.
Ooh.
And they are an alliance, and that was the...
No, what's annoying me is that there's a bank joke in here somewhere, and for the life of me I can't remember the name of the bank that has a line. It's all right. It probably hasn't existed since like the 90s. So it's fine. There's
an alliance bank somewhere in the UK. Maybe. Yeah, that's...
It's in there. There's a joke like scratching at the edge of my imagination here, and I can't quite pin it down. So what you witnessed was me trying to pull out of that joke before I had to explain the fact that I was making half a joke.
I like dragging us back into the dirt when
having to deconstruct it, and here we are.
I love the shame.
The joke has swallowed itself.
Wait, what? Banking? What?
No,
okay, nothing.
Wanking?
Well, no, it's just like, Deadpool. Anyway, so just a couple of non-spoilery notes on that. Have you seen it? Oh, yeah. Good. Yeah, you enjoy yourself? Yeah. So, I enjoyed myself. There was definitely, and this is going to come full circle when I come around to reviewing my Alliance game, which is actually Marvel Ultimate Alliance from 2006 on the PSP. Very much a movie of two halves for me, like not physically split into two halves where you kind of go, okay, well, there's part A and part B, but almost that I really, really, really enjoyed the experience, which is what I kind of, if I go to cinema now, I kind of tell myself that's what I'm doing now at the cinema. Right. Whereas, say, me 15 years ago would have probably been extremely offended by Deadpool versus Wolverine because it felt like it was a kind of a bit of a shit film underneath all the fun goo. If that. So I don't know how you felt about it, without spoiling, because obviously it's this is us being quite current, like as in
No, I know, it's weird, isn't it?
Yeah.
I had fun. I enjoyed it. I do not give a monkeys about Marvel anymore. I really don't. Like, I used to be really, really into it. I used to collect a load of the comics. I used to read a lot of graphic novels.
This is what I wanted to get to. Brilliant.
Loved the films and all that kind of stuff when they first came out. Once we got past the first Avengers one, and then more and more, they're kind of assuming you've watched everything.
Yeah.
That's where I start to draw the line.
Yeah.
And there's just too much of it.
Yeah.
And the bit that kind of coloured my opinion of Deadpool and Wolverine, I don't think it's spoilery to say that there is a story beat that is referring to something from one of the TV shows that Deadpool actually calls out. And we came out of it, and I said to my wife, like, oh, actually, that was kind of useful, because now I know, like, if I did want to find out more about that one bit, I could just go and watch that one bit. To which the response was, well, I thought that was just a sort of throwaway joke. I was like, no, they used to do this in the comics all the time, because there was so much stuff they would have to put in the corner of a panel, like, this is where you go for more information, basically. And then I realised, like, fuck a duck, if we get into the stage that you're having to do that with your films, you've possibly gone wrong somewhere.
Well, so I want to ask you this because when we get on to talking about Marvel Ultimate Alliance, and we'll come to your Alliance game in a little while as well. I am very much of the era that I started liking Marvel probably the comics the same time that, weirdly enough, that kind of like Watchmen came out as a movie, and I started getting to sort of Alan Moore, and then I started to want to read comic books, but like I wanted big volume comic books. I wanted like the whole of Civil War or the whole of the Invincibles and things. So I was like quite I guess really a latecomer. Like I never really watched like the X-Men in the 90s and stuff and things like but I was very aware of it, and then I just started like, I guess, probably binging on those kind of comic books and things, and then the MCU came along. And weirdly enough, I missed Marvel Ultimate Alliance the first time round, but I'm aware that you are probably more steeped in comic book lore and things, and it's interesting you say about they used to get, in a comic book, you used to do go to this comic, or go to, volume 67 of this thread to go and find out more about this. But then you've just said and criticised, I guess, the film, saying, well, you've gone wrong if you do it in your films. But does that not feel like a bit sort of, double?
I'm glad you asked this question. I'm going to say no, for the simple fact that on this occasion, it was like signposted within the film as a joke. The films are at the stage now where that should not be a joke. That should be a fucking given.
Yeah.
You should tell me. It should pop up in the corner of the screen or something. I don't care. Yeah. Like, just, if that is the case, if I have to have some kind of prior knowledge before I watch your narrative experience, I kind of want to be informed. Like, the first set of MCU films, like, were coherent. Nowadays, I can't help but think, you go into a lot of them, and if you haven't watched everything, you're going to be utterly clueless.
Yeah, it's dog awful. It really is. That is what has happened to the MCU, and people kind of dart around it a little bit and sort of say, oh, we know it's gone down in quality and things. It is really, really poor. And for somebody that was like, and I know the next person next to me would say the same probable thing, but I was just so... I mean, I had a panic attack in the Avengers. The first Avengers film, when it came out, was it 2012, I think it was? Around about then. I physically had a panic attack before the start of that film, because I got myself into that point where I actually, from about 2005, I got myself so into Marvel, and then the MCU came along and things, that actually I was so excited for that. And then, like, within the... So I never saw the first part of the Avengers until like it came out on DVD, like, because I was like, oh, I missed it, because I had to go out of the cinema, because I was like, I was so excited, and then I was like, this is ridiculous. I'm like mid 20-year-old man, and I'm like, oh, but I'm happy to admit that. But yeah, and then obviously when it built to crescendo with Infinity War and Endgame and things, I was super pumped, and then I was like, okay, it's coming to Disney, it'll be nice to have some at home, but I didn't want it to become... I want it still to be event theatre, cinema, and it isn't anymore. And so this is the first time I've been to the cinema, actually, I think, since... Is it the first time I've been to see a Marvel film since Endgame, maybe? Because I was...
perhaps.
And I was like, I've heard really good things about this, and also I thought it was doing big money at the box office and things. But yeah, from a story point of view... I was disappointed, but then also I thought it was quite interesting that people were saying, so I was listening to the IGN podcast, because it's become a thing for them the last week or so, because they gave it a pretty poor review and said actually we similar sort of things to what we're saying, that it was really fun but very throwaway gags, and actually the main story driven part of it and the MCU part of it was poor, which is what I feel like I'm saying it. I don't know if you feel like you saying the same thing, or...
I can't remember. I wish I could remember where I saw this particular comment, but I saw it and it stuck with me because I completely agreed with it. It might have been somewhere suitably poncy, like The Guardian or something like that.
Like that's what they have at the top of the paper. Suitably poncy. Since 1907.
I wonder if it was The Guardian, But they basically said that, like, unless you are... au fait with the kind of what's the word, the kind of the climate that the production has happened in, you kind of need to have this meta awareness of the environment in which the film was made, and the kind of legal wranglings around it. And like, I like some of the cameos, and I like some of the nods and all that kind of stuff, but you're going to enjoy it a lot more if you appreciate that kind of extra layer of legal bullshit, I guess, around it. But then that kind of taps into that whole assumption of knowledge,
which is
kind of at the heart of the film. So I personally quite enjoyed it. I completely take the point about like fitting into the wider Marvel story. It's not really bringing a hell of a lot to the party. But to be honest with you, I'm sick to the back teeth of stuff trying to fit into a wider Marvel story. It's quite nice to have something that feels a bit more self-contained.
So this is the point that I guess that IGN were getting a lot of feedback, and it was like, oh well, we were really disappointed that it didn't push the MCU along. And then I was like, I mean, and I've not heard anyone say this yet, but it's a 15 film, like in the UK, whatever that is, and in other territories, like you have to be 15 years old to see it, and it's almost, I mean, it's very gratuitous even for a 15. Like, not being like, holding my handbag and clutching my pearls here. It just is like, as in, so Disney are not going to use this as the vehicle to move on the Marvel Cinematic Universe that's all been 12 and PG. When half of your audience that are children,
the kids aren't going to be able to see it, so why bother?
Or they see, like, as a parent, you'd have to go, well, how many kids are going to scream at their parents going, I have to see Deadpool Wolverine because it's part of the MCU. And it's like, so they kind of have their hands tied that they can't move it on with the plot. Is my assumption and feeling. So therefore,
I think that's a completely fair point.
Yeah, and so I understand why the story's a bit meh. But then at the same time, I don't completely agree with you that you should still be serviceable to the point where you don't have to have seen all of the TV show that you sort of related it to. Which is, I mean, I don't think it's a spoiler necessarily to say, but a lot of it is to do with Loki, which it's that is a high production. High profile show on Disney Plus, but you have to have Disney Plus to have seen that as well. It's just exactly. Like you couldn't have just paid once to go to the cinema to see it.
There's a lot of barriers to enjoyment. I think that it kind of sets up for itself. And granted, part of that is down to the character, and part of that is because I came out of the film was cheerfully like saying to my wife, "Oh yeah, when I used to read them, they did this, that, the other, and and drawing all these parallels." And so I was clearly enthusiastic about it enough at the time to be like, "Oh yeah, I kind of get what they're going for. I had fun with that. I've liked the other Deadpool films and all that kind of stuff." But at the same time, I kind of feel like as a film, I shouldn't be having to explain that. Afterwards, it should be doing its own thing.
It should be lifting.
But that's me.
And so, how do you feel about the Robert Downey Jr. coming back as Doctor Doom? Because, I mean, the immediate feeling, I think that everybody would be feeling. I know you're probably going to say it anyway, but is that it's a cynical cash grab by Marvel and Feige, kind of going, we need to bring back RDJ and the Russos to bring back some sort of level of. Well, is it even to the point where they're like, where we credibility? I don't know.
I think it depends on where they go with the story, because I think I put this on a WhatsApp chat that you were in. Like there have been stories in the comics where the Iron Man has done this, that, the other, or gone the other way, and blah 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 blah. So there is kind of precedent for it, but at the same time, for me, they were the kind of storylines that were throwaway, sideline, what if type things. That if you're making that potentially a pretty central pillar to your story, could well put you on narrative shaky ground. Narrative ground. So yeah, I'm willing to let it play out. I am not excited. I haven't been excited about the MCU for quite a long time now. And that's not cynical hipster edgelord talking. That's former film student talking, where they've just not done it for me. And I can sit there and I can have fun with some of them. Wolverine and Deadpool being a good example, or Deadpool and Wolverine, whichever way around it is, just to show how much attention I was paying. But ultimately, I don't feel the need to go out and watch every single thing like I once did.
And I think that I feel the exact same way. I want it to be good. I want it to play off for them, but I want it to be paying off for them, not in a monetary point of view, but paying off for them. Oh, we've got a good narrative back, and actually, we are good cinema again. Not what they're currently putting out at the moment.
I think, kind of like I've said before now about Sonic, Star Wars, a lot of these sorts of things, I'm a firm believer in endings.
Yeah.
And I think if you've got a good story, it needs a good ending. Maybe not even a good ending. Like, it needs an ending. Like, if it doesn't end, it's not really a story, is it?
No.
So, I mean, if you have a film called Endgame, you know, and you carry on past that, I think you are making a rod for your own back, really.
Half-time game.
Yeah, exactly. And it just feels like, you know, if you've kind of emotionally invested, let's say, in this series, and you've pushed through and you've seen everything, you've finally got to the last bit, and you have that payoff, and then they release a load more stuff, and you're just like, well, what's the fucking point? Like, what have I just sat through all that for? So yeah, I'm not excited about it.
Yeah, no, fair enough. Well, let's bring this part to an end, which, you know, that we're going to die on our own, you know, our own swords, and just sort of, right, if we fucking stop. Right, okay, here we go. So let's just take a quick, like, juncture to something else that we've been looking at the last 2 weeks, when we've been apart from each other. So... I like the shame, and I like to make you feel weird. So, Retro Gamer, the last episode.
The MCU's got you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Last episode of Retro Gamer magazine. They've done a 20th anniversary PSP special.
Are you feeling old yet?
That was a nervous laugh.
Try not to think about it.
Pretty much so. You know, I mean, almost old in the age of this podcast as well. That, you know, nearly a year and a half ago, we were like, oh, it's been like 18 years since PSP's out. Now it's 20 years.
Yeah, like, and yet what? I didn't do the maths.
I was like, what? So yeah, that's you know, yeah, we're old as fuck. It's fine. But it was really nice to see that, and they have been kind of prodding over the last few months that they were going to go towards doing something for the PSP. If you kind of seen a lot of the letters and a lot of the sort of sub-articles.
The breadcrumbs were there, like the MCU.
They were just sort of leading me in. Like, saying, oh, it's coming.
Oh, and then laying the groundwork.
Yeah, and then they dropped a Game Boy Advance one like 2 months ago, and I was like, oh, yeah, no, okay, we're moving to the handheld sort of zone. So, yeah, it was really nice to see that they'd done that. I don't necessarily want to report on it because you don't want to spoil it for anyone, but I would definitely go and check it out if you love PSP, which I'm hoping that you would do if you listen to this podcast quite regularly. You know, and you might, if you don't, then, you know, like, you're a real hero. And yeah, I don't know what you thought about, if you had any thoughts or feelings on it or anything that you wanted to discuss without.
Well, I mean,
get into too much detail.
Yeah, you remember when we did that chat about the handheld special edition thing that they put together?
Yeah.
I kind of maybe enjoyed is not quite the right word, but I found this particular feature article a bit more engaging and useful.
Yeah.
Than the PSP
fair.
coverage in the limited edition thing that they did.
Yeah.
I thought it was a really interesting article from the kind of technical point of view, but also the sort of production and build up and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, I thought it was well played and very even handed. And yeah, I well worth a read, I think.
There was certainly some parts of it that it was interesting to find out about things that we've almost echoed in the podcast. So there's been a couple of times where I've picked up some games from like 2009, for example, and I've been like, oh, the quality of the PSP game in 2009 seems to be on the up compared to, say, 2007, 2008. And it refers to why that might have happened in the article. Yeah. And you're like, oh, right, oh, shit.
That makes sense.
Yeah, there's something that actually, you know, like, I've been feeling on the inside, and this is why. You know, and they talk about the, I guess, the market that the PSP is in. So it gives you that real good feel about why it came about, why it had ups, why it had downs, and why it ended. Unlike the MCU, but maybe not. Maybe it ended as badly or ending as badly. But yeah, it really was one of those things where it kind of filled you with pride almost, which is ridiculous. It's a games console, but it did, and almost made me feel like we are vindicated doing this in the podcast now, because actually there's a lot to talk about. There are a lot of good games out there still to play. There's and afterwards, this isn't going to sound as it meant to sound grand or anything, but like as in a couple of days later, I was playing on the PSP again and holding it back in my hand and thinking about it. And after reading that article, I was almost like, "This is it is really good. It's a really good handheld console that just had so much going for it."
I think it's easy to forget how striking it was when it first came out, and like even just the design of the damn thing and all that. And I can't help but think that the jump from PSP to Vita was nowhere near as big as from nothing to PSP. Or arguably, I guess the Game Boys would be the kind of nearest equivalent. So yeah, no, it was a good read.
So if you are, as we've just said, into the PSP, if you can check out Retro Gamer. You can get it on Pocket Mag's app as well if you can't get the physical version. So because I put the photo of the magazine into a couple of groups on Facebook and Reddit and stuff, and people were like, "Oh, what which issue is this in, or where is it and stuff?" And I was like, nice. "All right, okay, so that's you can get it on Retro Gamer. They can get it through a subscription.
They're not paying you to share." I feel like I need to chuck that caveat in there.
Yeah, no.
They haven't paid for this.
No, exactly. But this is just for the love of the game, so to speak. Right. So all that said, then an alliance has been formed with Retro Game in this podcast. That is in
whether or not they know it.
Whether they fucking like it or not. So 2 games we picked. Then I've already told you what I have played this week, which is the Marvel Ultimate Alliance on the PSP. Mm-hmm. What did you play?
What have I done? Dungeon Hunter Alliance.
Okay.
On the Vita.
I know nothing of this game. Do you want to go first? I feel like I've talked spaffed a bit there.
Let me find my notes. Right. Dungeon Hunter Alliance. Let me count the ways in which I love you. It's 0 ways. I do not take any delight in poo-pooing other people's work, right? Like, I appreciate that they have gone to the effort of making this port of a 2009 iPhone game, but my God,
the effort that takes is
ultimately, I mean, it's Gameloft and I think Ubisoft. They've made more games than I have.
It's true.
So
true.
Credit where credit's due. And I think, in fact, to go back to my point about the PSP itself, right, and how I can imagine that at the time it was, you'd look at it and go, wow, and then over time that kind of fades and other things supersede it. I can imagine that when this first came out on Vita, it would have scratched an itch, because it's basically Diablo, right? So hacking, slashing, going through dungeons, completing quests, getting loot, improving your character through, building their stats, getting new skills, and all that kind of stuff, finding loot loot again, and all that kind of good stuff. So I can imagine that when it first came out, if you're in the mood for some hacking and slashing, yeah, absolutely. As I was at the time, like I remember looking at it in magazines or online or whatever, and going like, oh, actually, yeah, that could be really fun, because I'm not really able to play Diablo. My God, is it boring? Like that, and I was trying to. Most of my notes are trying to pin down why I like Diablo, and I don't like this. And there's a few things. I think ultimately, what it boils down to is world building. Like Diablo is much better at creating a world that feels lived in, has some lore, and all that kind of stuff. This just feels so tepid, I guess. But I think what did it for me is the little things. So when you are, like, it's controlled from an isometric point of view, so it's very easy to move behind bits of scenery or be surrounded by enemies. And the visibility of your character is not good. Like, it's very easy to get lost on the screen.
Okay.
Like, you're in the middle of it, but you can't see him. Incidentally, character creation is you choose from one of 3 classes, and it's always he.
Right, okay.
There is very little variety.
Which is completely different from what you expect of a game this ill. 'Cause usually
exactly. You expect a bit more agency over what's going on. And the progression, once you're into the thick of it, does not feel particularly snappy or quick. So it feels like a bit of a slog. It's very difficult to see. The Vita hardware kind of lets it down a little bit, and you can kind of tell that the developers were like, oh, we can put these mechanics in without thinking that whether or not they should. So if you get stunned, you have to shake the Vita to get yourself out of that stun state. Which, if you are
Rumble Pack,
if you're surrounded by enemies behind a pillar and you're having to shake the Vita, that's making the visibility even worse. It's just fundamentally ridiculous. It's like no one played it and realised this could be a problem. You've got like this little fairy companion with you, and depending on the one that you equip, you can do different bits of magic, but you have to like double tap the screen, or you can use the rear touchpad to control where they go, which if they start flashing a certain way, you might be able to find a secret chest and stuff like that. Or you can use the right analog stick, and it's inoffensive enough, but at the same time feels kind of shoehorned in.
I'm going to go ahead and assume, I mean, I know we won't have done this kind of detailed research because, we're amateurs, that the mobile app must have sold quite well to somebody to have said, take a punt on being a Vita vehicle.
I did wonder, and the reason I wondered is because it feels like exactly the kind of game that if you released it nowadays would be chock full of microtransactions to speed stuff up. It just feels like there's enough of that kind of the gaps in gameplay,
that's a nice way of putting it, isn't it?
Yeah, like you could pay to speed up the leveling process or something like that. It feels like it was crying out for something like that.
Fucking microtransactions, just gaps in life.
Well, it's something like that. It feels like it's like artificially drawn out almost. The frame rate can dip when it gets hectic, which by design it gets pretty hectic pretty quickly. So that doesn't exactly endear me to it. It's got some really long load times. If you die, it comes up with tips, one of which is basically like, death is meaningless for those who have already died. Now, in the plot, your character is dead at the start and you kind of get resurrected and have to go on this quest. And then I realised that actually, in the game, there's no penalty for death besides being put back at the start of a dungeon. And you have to kind of walk to where you were. But the number of enemies you go through is significantly reduced because they haven't respawned in yet. Actually, death, is pretty meaningless in the game still.
Can you remember back to Guacamelee, which kind of had that sort of similar vibe where you're playing through dungeons in the land of the dead, effectively, aren't you? What was the penalty like for that? There was that noticeable? Or?
It was more noticeable, but then the enemies would be there still, so you'd have something to do when you were walking back to where you got killed or whatever. And if you fell off a ledge, it would just put you back to the beginning of the run and you try again. So it's a quick cycle, whereas this, you've got to sit through some really long load times and all that. And like the setup is not terrible. It's just that the way the story is told is very bare bones, and I personally didn't find it engaging. Like, it's solid enough, and I did check the reviews from when it first came out, and it was pulling in like 5 out of 10s and very average reviews. And I can see that at the time, I get that, but nowadays, when I know damn well I can go play Diablo in a bunch of different places, and a bunch of different Diablos at that, it really does not scratch much of an itch. And the cardinal sin for me, ignoring the fact that it's frame rate's choppy, visibility's poor, quests are linear, it doesn't feel like you can really like go off and explore anything out. The cardinal sin, I was bored. I was bored witless. So this is getting 2 out of 10, and instead I ended up spending a fair bit of my time playing Thank Goodness You're Here.
Did you?
I did.
Brilliant. Yeah, amazing. I love that you brought this up.
This is going to be such a short review.
But this is awesome, because I genuinely last night was sat there going, £13.50 on the Switch. And I was like, which is great value for a game, don't get me wrong and stuff. But then when I heard it was like 2 hours long, and then I remember that I was like, I paid like 89p for like Turnip Boy, and that was kind of like 2.5 hours and a similar sort of game. I was a bit like, I'm just going to wait.
Wait until Rich has bought it.
I'm just going to wait, because I feel like you might. All right. So that you've done it. And he's like, we're on sync.
Cool.
Syncopatico.
How much did you pay for your cinema ticket for Deadpool?
£10.
£10. and that film's what, 2.5 hours long?
Yeah.
I had infinitely more fun with Thank Goodness You're Here.
I've had those thoughts over the weekend as well. I was
now, granted, for those who may be unfamiliar, it came out on Yorkshire Day. It is basically a love letter to Yorkshire and all the kind of like quirky, weird, deranged Britishness that is out there. I played it through on Sunday morning. And
that's a nice time to do it.
It is a really nice time. Yep, it was a great time. My wife watched the entire playthrough as well because she saw the opening couple of minutes and was hooked.
Yeah.
I have not laughed so hard at anything like that for a very long time.
Yeah.
I think it might be one of the funniest things I've ever played. It is like playing like a kind of Yorkshire version of Rick and Morty almost.
Yeah.
And it does look and feel like a cartoon. It's you can move, you can jump, you can slap things. That's all your interaction with the world, and then you just kind of buckle up and go along on this ride. And I can't talk about it too much without spoilering it. It doesn't need me to talk about it. For me, it is a 10 out of 10 game.
Wow.
£13, absolutely well spent. Fucking well done.
Yeah.
What was it, Cole Supper, for putting that together. And yeah, if you are even vaguely familiar with the north of England, like, just go buy it. If you're not from the north of England, you can put subtitles on.
So that's what I was. So I was going to ask that. So IGN UK, same podcast about talking about Deadpool, Wolverine. That is, they talked about Thank Goodness You're Here as well, and they were saying this. They said it was probably the funniest video game they've ever played, and I'd say they actually went into quite a lot of probably spoilerish detail about it. That is, and so come to our podcast. Don't listen to them. Come, they're much more popular. Living La Vita Loca podcast. But one thing that I would be interested in knowing is that how well it would sell in other territories, because
we were saying the same thing.
It's just like to have a 10 out of 10 game, but the joke to be you kind of have to know a bit about the culture and the area.
So my wife went down the rabbit hole with that exact question, and I didn't get the detail of where she found this. So apologies, I'm about to pass on something that, you know, this work is not my own.
Fiona went to Peru.
No. She said she found a review from someone who's in Singapore.
Oh, right, okay.
And we were like, yeah, that's sufficiently removed. I bet it would be interesting to hear what they reckon. They had a really good point, and I wish I knew who said this because it is an incredible point. Where they reckoned, in a perfect world, you would replicate that game and you would do one for various different territories, because they reckon you'd be able to get exactly the same kind of comic potential from a Singaporean focused sort of similar kind of a setup. And I think that's a great idea.
Yeah.
Like, Cole Supper could go and make like a bunch, like, work with people around the world, make a bunch of different games like this, 2-hour little, you know, vignettes of life in that place. You know, I think that could make for an incredible series, and then you bundle it all up and pop it on like a compilation or something like that. Like, oh man, you get the right people on board. I think that is an incredible idea, and I wish I knew who to credit for it, 'cause it's not me. But yeah, they did acknowledge the fact that they found it amusing, but some of the jokes definitely went over their head. And I think that is a very fair point. I could see how that would happen, considering the first question the game asks you is if you're from town, but it asks you it in Tyke.
Right.
So, and if you don't pick the right answer, you get the proper English subtitles.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Or you get the Tyke subtitles.
To it.
Yeah. So like an all would be written as and all, or ARNOUL or something like that. So like, yeah, they've gone into a lot of detail with it.
It's so wonderful to see something get such a good reception. Like, is in sometimes
from out of nowhere as well.
Yeah,
as best I can tell.
Sometimes, so you know how you were like, oh, you don't, you were thinking that you don't take any pride, knocking people's work down and things like that. And it's like when you see games just across the board, everyone's 5 out of 5, 10 out of 10, best game you'll play this year and stuff, and it's like, and you just think, gosh, my human nature, which is crippled and ugly inside, just thinks that there must be something wrong with it. It can't be perfect, but then I trust you implicitly, so it must be pretty fucking good.
We've always said that here, 10 out of 10 is not perfect. It is, however, like, incredible, life-affirming, and all that kind of stuff. And the reason that I wanted to mention it in this episode as well is the fact that on the one hand you've got Dungeon Hunter Alliance, which feels a little bit like the result of taking a great idea and a great game, in Diablo, and sanding off the edges, and I don't know, designing by committee or what, but it just feels like it's been gone through like a blanding machine, whatever that would be, to just make it to just make it like the
most there painting you, but this is exactly
like, it's
something
just the beige version of Diablo, and it is like the blandest version of what that could be. And then at the other end of the scale, you've got something like Thank Goodness You're Here, which is made with such creativity, love, and all that good stuff. Like it's art. You know, that is the other end of the scale, and that is why I had to mention both of them in the same place.
Yeah. Oh man, like, you know, I think I probably shouldn't have buying it anyway. Like, I feel like I can't not. I feel like I can't miss out on it.
I highly recommend it. They thoroughly deserve your money.
Yeah.
They
well,
really,
this is it as well. Like, as in, I think that whilst I will come across as a massive cheapskate when I'm like, oh, £13, I think I'll leave it for a bit and stuff. But like at the same time, like, I don't really buy new games at all. I mean, whilst I spend the same amount of money pretty much every month on Game Pass, that is in, although that's tied into my Xbox Series X contract. As in, I don't know if I will be renewing it on that level when it comes around to January, when it's due to be renewed. We'll have a think about that as a pod collective. Maybe you guys can help me make a decision. So you know that I should, but like, you know, for a one-off £13, sort of to have 2 hours of the best time of your life, it sounds like.
Solid hours as well. Like there's barely any downtime, and it's very, very like infrequent that you won't be laughing at something. Yeah. Like I think in a kind of jokes and gags per minute ratio, I mean, it beats Deadpool into a cocked hat.
The fact that my wife, who hates video games, sent me an article about it, and she's like, look at this, I think you really like this, and she clearly read it all and actually was intrigued in the concept. I was like, wow, this must be, you know, like, it's got to have something to it. So
next time I'm visiting my parents, say, rather than watching a film, I would be tempted to just sit them down and go, right, I'm going to play through this, you're going to watch. And I think they would still get as much out of it as watching a film.
I guess that'd be a nice idea,
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Well, that's a lovely note to, you know, I guess leave your reviews on. Let's talk about inspiration then. So you were uninspired by Dungeon Hunter Alliance.
Very much so.
So much that I forgot the name of the game.
It's that generic.
Yeah. But very inspired by Thank Goodness You're Here.
Absolutely.
How inspired was I by Marvel Ultimate Alliance? So this is a game of two halves, Clive. And the reason for that is that I feel like the main thrust of the game, the story part of it, this is probably going to sound a lot like the Deadpool and Wolverine situation. That is one thing, and then the world that you live in and the effective Marvel universe, what is it, Marvel gaming universe, that universe and the content is another thing. So with all that in mind, then, like I said, it was released in 2006. It was released on all major consoles, and then it was ported to the PSP by Vicarious Visions. And so you basically, and most people will hopefully have, you know, played the game or know about it and things. But so you play a team of heroes, and it's not just specifically the Avengers. There is a roster up to 27 people on the PSP version. I think 4 of them are exclusive to the PSP, which is always nice to see PSP exclusives. You know, that is in to have something. So there was actually more on the PSP, I think, than there was on any other console, which again...
That's impressive.
Yeah, I said that about Lemmings. I was a bit like, you know, if there's something more for a handheld console, which a lot of people think would be a shorter, worse experience, that's good that, you know, somebody's went, oh, we're going to port this and put more into it.
Yeah.
So out of this roster of 27 heroes, of which most, I'd say 2/3 of them are available to you straight away, and then you pick more up as well. Hawkeye is one of those things where you can get him, but it's like you have to sign up to sort of the servers and things. But I don't think it was microtransaction-y. I think it was just do you want to sign up to our servers? You get Hawkeye for it, basically. So I couldn't do that because the
code in the box, buy a new kind of thing, but you can't get it pre-owned.
Yeah. So I couldn't get Hawkeye because the servers are no longer alive.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want him anyway. He's shit. So, like, you know, I'll go into that another time about how much they hang on Hawkeye across some of the MCU parts of it, where I'm like, oh god, there's meant to be the human part of it. It's just a terrible character. So anyway, the good characters in the team, out of those 27 people, you have a team of 4 all times, and it's a sort of strategy. It shares a lot of shared DNA with with Dungeon Hunter Alliance. It's isometric view. It's a strategy action beat 'em up. So a little bit less of an RPG sort of looty thing. But you do pick things up, but the things that you pick up are mostly like effectively Avenger coins, and they are used to help increase your character's stats and powers. So in terms of a storyline and what you're actually doing, so Doctor Doom, funnily enough, is basically being really campy and a bit just a bit weird, really. That is in like, so him and this sort of league of villains effectively have just attack the Marvel goodies, if you will, and they want to take over the world. That's as far as it goes, really. That is in. So there's lots of ins and outs, and the story is really, whilst not complex, very dense. That is in. So you go to a lot of different settings. There's a lot of, right, Doom's gone here, or this villain's gone here, or this hero's asking for help over here, in all the different Marvel worlds and settings that you can go to, which, as I've alluded to previously, I was more au fait with after seeing the MCU and now than I would have been when a game came out in 2006. Yeah. I probably would have known maybe a little bit about it, but not as much. So that is one thing that I guess that playing it nowadays, a lot more people would be a lot more, this is this popular place, or, unless you were really deep in the comic book lore, I think that this game benefits from being played now than it probably would have done previously in terms of for me.
Yeah, no, I could see that, like, especially with the MCU and the number of people that have kind of hopped on it. But the reason I'm sort of like is because when I was at university, we played the absolute ever-loving shit out of Marvel Ultimate Alliance 2, which did like a little Civil bit of War. Secret Invasion and Civil War storylines, and then kind of did its own thing at the end. And part of the appeal of that was, like Secret Invasion and Civil War storylines, and like that was kind of just before the MCU was touching any of that lot, so it was kind of nice to see those storylines pop up somewhere.
I think that there's two sides of the coin then, that I think that it was nice to go back to these characters that were nothing to do with the MCU. That is in, so you could see a different type of Captain America, a different type of Black Panther, and one of the great things about the game is, I don't know if Ultimate Alliance 2 had this or not, but they had comic book sort of side quests for each of the characters as well, which were really quite comprehensive. That is in, so not just like a side quest, it was an actual game that you come out of the main game. So the main, after the, I guess, entry level, if you will, which is the shield helicarrier, which is about an hour in itself, and you basically end up at Stark Tower, and that's kind of like your hub for the game, like in terms of you moving out and doing the main storyline, but it also has these side quests as well, which like I said, comprehensive and extensive themselves, where it's like, this is Captain America's quest, or and there's a little bit of a story to it, but ultimately it's just more you get to use this character by themselves rather than being in a team, so you do kind of get to know them a little bit more, and they aren't those same MCU characters. So again, it sounds silly, but for playing it nowadays as well, I found it quite refreshing after what we've said about the Marvel Cinematic Universe now at the moment. It was almost nice to kind of go, I get to play as
reintroduced.
Yeah, exactly. And this is, and this in this world, in this gaming world, they have this personality, and it was almost like that was cool. So yeah, there's so much of this dense comic book lore kicking about, and also the characters. So you build up their stats, which actually attach their outfits, which is a bit of a sort of strange sort of circumstance, really. And then, like I said, you pick up these Avenger coins, which then you use to customize powers. And the game really seems to concentrate on that strategy side of things. Where it doesn't concentrate is the main thrust of the story. It does a pretty... this game is the most okay game I've played, I think. That is in, so it's just okay. It's fine. That is in, so it does enough to get through. I wasn't inspired by it necessarily when it came to sort of the main thrust of the storyline. The fun part of it is almost just you're in the team of 4, and once you pick those characters, and you can change them every level, so you can change up to whoever you want to the 27 characters. It was almost chopping and change between the characters and see who could do what and what their customizable powers were. The game didn't really give you any incentive to do that. It was almost like you could just play through as Spider-Man if you wanted to, but like there's nothing at any point where it's kind of like, oh, but actually you should probably play as Captain America in this part because that this is his storyline, or this is his powers would work better against these characters. That is in it. It'll be like, oh, this Atlantean warrior is weak against a stun move, and it's like, right, okay, but everyone can kind of do that stun move, not just specifically like Wolverine or anything. So it's so dense in that stat sort of power part of it. It's kind of hard to wade your way through it. It's impressive, but it's almost like to get to the who's the best character and why, and then the storyline's a bit meh, like as in like you're almost a bit like, all right, okay, and the villains don't help either. So the villains are very, like I said, kind of like campy schlock, like as in the voice acting's terrible. Like
they're
it's
almost
really
like comic book villains.
They really are. Yeah, like as in there's nothing about it that makes you think that there's any stakes necessarily. Like, I mean, early on, you're kind of like moving around these sort of weird sterile environments, just disarming a lot of bombs or going to just lots of fetch quests to go and do things, and the bosses they kind of change up a little bit. They kind of like do something different, but I would say the performance on the PSP is kind of found out in the bits that it tries to be a bit different. Right. The bits where you're just smashing up boxes to get more of these Avenger coins, or smash up enemies just to get more health and more energy and things. Like as in, it struggles because it's like, well, I'm just doing the same thing over and over. But that's kind of like, but the performance of the game is fine. It flows. When you kind of get to parts where it tries to lift the story or do something different, the performance of the game sags. And it's like, oh, that's disappointing. You can kind of see the chug and the frame rate drop. So, yeah, and I don't know if I feel like that might be part of the port, maybe a little bit more than necessarily like. And I know this game is really quite well regarded, you kind of regularly see it as, if you type in, best Marvel video games and stuff, one of the Ultimate Alliances, usually 1 or 3, which is interesting because 3 is the Switch only one.
Funny enough, that's what I was just Googling. So I rarely see 2, which is funny because you said you played the shit out of it. I mean, it's a guilty pleasure, don't get me wrong.
So it's interesting that you say that, because I mean, why would you say it's a guilty pleasure? Is it not from a critical point of view?
Because it's utterly brain dead.
No.
So, like, in fact, actually, weirdly, it kind of, I guess, goes back to what I was saying about Dungeon Hunter Alliance, where it's kind of Diablo-esque, but without the loot layer.
Yeah.
But there's something like, while the actual gameplay is kind of not by the numbers and bland, like it's engaging enough, but a large part of it is that universe, that world building that Dungeon Hunter Alliance did not nail, whereas in Marvel Ultimate Alliance 2 it did enough, and it had enough sense in the details to, well, the one that always gets me was I would always play as Gambit, right? Okay. And you could like pick up bits of scenery, like benches, say, and hit people, throw them at them, and all that kind of stuff. However, if you did it with Gambit, he would automatically charge it up because that's one of his powers.
Yeah,
so like the fact that the developers had thought to include that detail, I always found weirdly endearing.
So that's, I guess, how I feel about this game overall. That I feel like for a Marvel purist, or someone that knows a lot about the comic book lore, or that really cares about these characters and wants to go deep into their stats and that how you would fight with these guys or girls, that I think that you would get a lot more out of it than maybe I did, and I was sort of felt a bit kind of sort of bogged down by it all. But at the same time, I'd be lying if I said I was really enjoying myself, but I was not in any way, shape or form thinking this is a bad game either.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like, and that's what I was trying to get to before. This is the most 5 out of 10 game I feel like I've ever played. Like, as in, and almost to the point where I'm like, if you really like Marvel, and you know a lot about the comic book lore, or you really like this you like a strategy, progressive stat building game where there's a lot to it, and you can get lots of content out of each of the different characters and their customizations. I think you'll get more out of it than I did. That's not to say that, but I still think that if they'd spent less time thinking about that and more time thinking about making a more exciting video game with better settings. I don't want to say better villains. I mean, you interact with 140 characters across the storyline, either that you are or that you know of, and it's almost like, so I don't want to say that it hits every beat you'd expect out of a Marvel Universe sort of game, and it's quite long. It's like 20 hours worth of play, and I think I played about 13 hours or something when I was like, all right, okay, I'm kind of done here, but I feel like I got enough out of it. So the villains weren't I think it was wrong with it, but like I say, the voice acting and things that is in it just didn't feel like it carried as much heft as I wanted it to. So yeah, I would recommend that you try a Marvel Ultimate Alliance game, whether it's, I don't know if this one's the best one, 2, 3, and especially recommend it, I think, if you're into customization of role-playing sort of strategy, isometric view situations, so sitting in between that Diablo Dungeon Hunter Alliance, almost in the middle of it, and thinking that's probably the centre ground of, build on from there maybe. So
makes sense.
Yeah, but again, I guess rounding the conversation back off, thinking about the PSP, to see something so ambitious ported to the PSP, as in, I'm not going to just go, I'll give it extra marks in a review, that is in, but what I will say is that it's good to see that, game developers were trying that, almost as well.
Credit where credit's due, absolutely.
Back in 2006, they're kind of going, right, well, we've got these home consoles things, and someone like Vicarious Visions to go, right, well, we'll take Raven's game and we'll do it. We'll try and put it on the PSP. Yeah. And whilst everything didn't land perfectly, I'm glad to have that experience where I've got it in my hand and my wife and kids have got the TV, and I can and I can sit there and think, well, actually, this is here, it's portable, it's, very good to look at, and the controls, so I didn't really mention this in the review, the controls, again, for something that is missing a couple of buttons, I'm finding more and more recently, I'm hitting a bit of a stride of games that I'm finding where actually the PSP controls are doing a pretty good job compared to what the home consoles were. And certainly it seems like this, for an earlier PSP game, did a pretty good job of where you've got 4 Marvel characters smashing into each other, and there's a lot going on sort of smashing into the enemies, and there's a lot going on the screen. The controls do a pretty good job. So, just bring it back around to that PSP 20 years old situation, having it still in my hand as a handheld console, and finding, I won't call this game a hidden gem, as in finding things about every single game that I play where I'm like, oh yeah, this is, apart from, me and my Katamari, which broke my fingers. Apart from that, it's just great, and I know I do this all the time, but I'm just loving doing this podcast. I'm loving being on the PSP again, and I love having these things to think about, that I took for granted back in 2006.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah. Cool. So thank you very much for listening, guys. We're going to stick on a bit of a movie theme next week, because Borderlands is coming out of the cinema, and I've never played a Borderlands game before, whereas I believe that you've played quite a few of them.
I have indeed. Talking of ambitious ports, I get to look at the Vita version of Borderlands 2.
Yeah, I am really interested to hear how that is. Oh no. But yeah, so I'll be playing through Borderlands on the PS3, so the original version. So yeah, looking forward to that. So, and obviously the movie's coming out. Is it out this week, next week? I can't remember. It's around about now.
Soon. It's out soon.
Will you be going to see it?
We were thinking we might.
All right, okay.
For reasons I will get into next time.
Perfect. Cool. Right. Well, thanks very much for listening, guys.
Cheers.
Bye.